The first time Hudson called me after midnight, I almost didn't answer. Not because I was asleep, because Hudson never called. He texted, sent voice notes when he was bored, shared dumb memes at 2 in the afternoon while pretending to pay attention during college lectures. But calling? That meant something was wrong. My phone buzzed across the nightstand again. Hudson, 12:37 a.m. I rubbed my eyes and picked up. Hey. There was silence for a second. Then his voice came through, quieter than usual. Grayson? Yeah. I need a favor. That immediately woke me up. What happened? Another pause. My car died. I sat up. Where are you? A gas station about 30 minutes outside town. At midnight. Long story. I leaned back against the headboard, waiting for him to laugh and tell me it was a prank. He didn't. You okay? I'm fine. He sounded exhausted. Can you come get me? There were probably 10 people Hudson could have called before me. His cousins, his teammates, his roommate, the guys he played basketball with every weekend. Instead, he called me. Text me the address. I said, you serious? I literally just said yes. He let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like relief. Thanks. I'll be there. I hung up before he could say anything else. 5 minutes later, I was driving through nearly empty streets, wondering why my heart was beating so much faster than the situation required. Hudson and I had known each other for almost 4 years. We met during freshman orientation when he accidentally took my backpack, convinced it was his. We argued for 5 full minutes before realizing we owned the exact same black backpack from the same discount store. He laughed. I didn't. Then he bought me coffee because, according to him, I looked like I was preparing a lawsuit. That became our first conversation. Somehow it never really ended. He was loud enough for both of us. I was the one who remembered birthdays, deadlines, and where he left his keys. He claimed he kept me from becoming an 80-year-old accountant trapped inside a college student. I claimed he was exhausting. Neither of us stopped hanging out. The road grew darker the farther I drove. The city lights disappeared behind me. Country roads stretched ahead under a pale moon, almost empty except for an occasional truck passing in the opposite direction. His location finally appeared on my navigation. 7 minutes away. I spotted the gas station before I reached it. Only one pump was lit. One vending machine buzzed beside the entrance. And Hudson sat on the curb outside, elbows resting on his knees. He looked up as my headlights swept across the parking lot. Even from inside the car, I could tell something was off. Not injured, not drunk, just defeated. I parked beside him. He stood immediately. You actually came. I lowered the window. Pretty sure that's how rides work. A small smile appeared. There he is. Who's that? The sarcastic Grayson I know. You're lucky I'm funny. I've been saying that for years. I got out and looked toward the dark parking lot. Where's your car? He pointed toward the repair shop attached to the station. They're keeping it until morning. What happened? No clue. You have roadside assistance. I know. You have insurance. I know. You have 600 contacts. I know. I folded my arms. So why am I here? For a moment, he didn't answer. He looked down at the cracked pavement, then back at me. I didn't really want to be alone tonight. The joke I'd been preparing disappeared instantly. Oh, sorry. No, I said quickly. Don't apologize. A cold breeze swept across the parking lot. Hudson shoved his hands into the pockets of his hoodie. I know it's weird. Not weird. Kind of is. I shrugged. You called. Yeah. You're here. Yeah. So let's go home. He nodded. The drive back started in complete silence. Not uncomfortable. Just tired. Hudson leaned his head against the passenger window, watching darkness slide past. Normally, he filled every quiet moment with stories. Today, he barely moved. About 15 minutes into the drive, I finally asked, so what really happened? He smiled without looking at me. I knew you'd ask eventually. You've been acting like someone canceled Christmas. It wasn't the car. I figured. Another minute passed. My girlfriend broke up with me. I glanced at him. I didn't even know you two were having problems. We weren't. That usually means you were. He laughed softly. Probably. When? This evening. And then you just drove? I didn't know where else to go. So you drove 30 miles into nowhere. Apparently. You're terrible at coping. I've been told. I nodded. Mostly by me. He smiled again. That smile lasted barely 2 seconds before disappearing. She said I always keep people at a distance. I kept my eyes on the road. Do you? I don't know. Yes, you do. You answered that pretty fast. Because I've known you for 4 years. He looked at me. You think I push people away? I think you let everyone think they know you. And, and almost nobody actually does. He stared through the windshield. You probably know me better than anyone. The words settled somewhere inside me that I'd spent years pretending didn't exist. I focused harder on driving. I've just been around longer. No. His voice stayed calm. You actually listen. Neither of us spoke again for several miles. Rain began tapping lightly against the windshield. The road reflected the headlights in long silver streaks. Hudson suddenly laughed under his breath. What? You remember sophomore year? Depends. I failed economics. You failed spectacularly. You stayed up until 4 helping me study. You still got a D. I passed. Barely. You still helped. You bought pizza. You hate pineapple. You ordered pineapple. You ate it anyway. I couldn't help smiling. You're impossible. I know. He turned toward me. You've always shown up. Something about the way he said it felt different. Not casual. Not nostalgic. Like he'd been thinking about it for a long time. I guess I have. I don't think I've ever thanked you. You don't have to. I should. The rain grew heavier. Windshield wipers swept back and forth in a steady rhythm. Hudson rested his forehead against the cool window. I think I keep expecting people to leave. I looked at him for a second. Why? My dad moved 3 states away when I was 16. I hadn't known that. My mom started working nights. He continued quietly. My older brother joined the military. He shrugged. People leave. I swallowed. And you figured if nobody got too close, it wouldn't matter. The rest of the sentence didn't need saying. I understood. More than I wanted to admit. Because I'd spent years doing almost the same thing. Only quieter. Only better hidden. The city lights finally appeared ahead. Hudson watched them without saying anything. Then, just before we reached my apartment building, he spoke again. Can I ask you something? Sure. Were you asleep when I called? Almost. And you still came? Yeah. He nodded slowly. I don't think anyone's ever done that for me. I parked outside my building and turned off the engine. The silence afterward felt strangely warm. Neither of us reached for the door. Neither of us seemed in a hurry to end the night. For the first time since I'd picked him up, Hudson looked completely at ease. He turned toward me with a tired smile. I don't think I called you because of the car. I know. I think I just knew you'd answer. I met his eyes. And for reasons I couldn't explain yet. I was glad I had. Hudson eventually broke the silence. You hungry? I looked at the dashboard clock. 1:26 a.m. At this hour? You picked me up after midnight. I feel like I owe you pancakes. You owe me gas. I can also owe you pancakes. I laughed. There's a diner 2 blocks away. The one that's open all night. Barely. He grinned for the first time that evening. Perfect. 5 minutes later, we were sitting in a nearly empty diner that smelled like coffee and fresh fries. Only one elderly couple occupied a booth near the window. A waitress with tired eyes greeted us like she'd seen us 100 times before. Same booth. Hudson blinked. You remember us? She smiled. You boys used to come here every Thursday during finals. I'd forgotten about that. Hudson hadn't. No way. You always ordered chocolate pie, she continued, pointing at him. Then she looked at me. And you pretended you didn't want any. Hudson laughed loudly enough to make the couple glance over. She remembers. I wish she didn't. The waitress winked. I'll bring 2 coffees. After she walked away, Hudson leaned back. That feels like another lifetime. It was only 2 years. College years count double. I think that's scientifically false. You're scientifically false. I rolled my eyes. There he is. What? My best friend. The words came out so naturally that neither of us reacted at first. Then, for reasons I couldn't explain, I suddenly became very aware of them. Best friend. I'd called him that before. Countless times. Tonight it sounded different. Maybe because of everything he'd admitted in the car. Maybe because it was nearly 2 in the morning. Or maybe because I was starting to notice things I'd ignored for years. The waitress returned with coffee. Hudson wrapped both hands around the mug. I needed this. You needed sleep. That too. For a while we talked about nothing important. His impossible basketball coach. My internship. A professor who somehow managed to assign 40 pages of reading every weekend. The conversation slowly became easier. Lighter. Then Hudson looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup. Can I tell you something embarrassing? You're assuming I won't use it against you. You definitely will. Probably. He smiled. I almost called someone else first. Oh. I stared at my contacts for like 10 minutes. And I couldn't press anybody else's name. I looked down at my coffee. Why not? I kept thinking, if I woke anyone else up, I'd feel guilty. And me? With you? He searched for the right words. I knew you'd probably complain. I definitely complained. But you'd still come. I stared into the dark coffee. That sounds unfair. It probably is. You should stop expecting me to rescue you. I know. He smiled. I'll probably fail. Something warm settled between us. Not romantic. Not yet. Just comfortable. The kind of comfort people spend years building without realizing it. After another minute, Hudson quietly asked, "Can I ask something else?" "Depends. Have you ever dated anyone?" I nearly dropped my mug. That came out of nowhere. I know. Yes. When? A while ago. You never told me. It wasn't a long relationship. How long? 5 months. Hudson frowned. I genuinely had no idea. There wasn't much to tell. What happened? I hesitated. He said I kept too much inside. Hudson stared at me. You're kidding. No. He leaned back slowly. So both of us got dumped for basically the same reason. Looks like it. That feels rude. It does. He laughed quietly. Maybe we're both emotionally defective. I'd settle for emotionally confusing. He pointed at me. That's definitely more accurate. The food finally arrived. Pancakes for Hudson. An omelet for me. He immediately stole one of my hash browns. You ordered pancakes. I wanted 1 hash brown. You took 3. They traveled together. I shook my head. You've been stealing my food since freshman year. And you've been pretending to hate it. I do hate it. No. He smiled. You like having something predictable. That caught me off guard. You always complain, he continued. I always ignore you. You never actually stop me. I opened my mouth. Closed it again. He wasn't wrong. After a while, our conversation drifted back toward quieter things. Hudson stared out the window. Can I admit something? You've been doing a lot of admitting tonight. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe. He watched the rain sliding down the glass. When my car stopped working, he paused. I didn't panic. No. I just suddenly realized I didn't know who my first phone call would be. I waited. And then your name popped into my head before anyone else's. He smiled faintly. It wasn't even a decision. Something tightened in my chest. I don't know why. I did. Or at least I thought I did. But saying it aloud felt dangerous. Instead, I shrugged. We've known each other forever. Yeah. But I don't think that's the reason. His voice had become quieter again. I think you're. He searched for another sentence. The only person I never feel like I have to perform around. I looked at him. Really looked. His hair was still damp from the rain. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. He looked exhausted. Honest. More honest than I'd ever seen him. You don't have to, I said. With you. No. Another silence settled over the booth. Neither of us rushed to fill it. Outside, the rain had almost stopped. Inside, the old diner hummed softly beneath dim yellow lights. Hudson slowly smiled. You know what's weird? What? This is probably the worst day I've had all year. And I don't really want a night to end. I looked at him for a long moment. Neither did I. That realization scared me far more than driving 30 miles after midnight ever had. We left the diner a little after 3. The streets were almost empty. Rain had washed the sidewalks clean, leaving everything reflecting the orange glow of streetlights. Hudson shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets as we walked toward my apartment. You know, he said, I should probably get my car tomorrow. That would be wise. I was hoping you'd tell me to abandon it forever. I was actually hoping you'd learn how oil changes work. Ouch. You'll recover. I don't know. That was personal. I smiled. Good. He bumped my shoulder lightly as we crossed the street. You're in a much better mood. You're less dramatic now. I was never dramatic. I stopped walking. He looked back. What? You called me from a gas station after midnight because your girlfriend broke up with you. So, you forgot to mention the car wasn't even smoking. He tried not to laugh. I may have exaggerated the emergency. You absolutely did. He grinned. But it worked. I looked at him. It did. For some reason, neither of us looked away immediately. The moment stretched just a little longer than it normally would have. Then Hudson cleared his throat. So, your couch still available? I blinked. My couch. I don't really want to go back to my apartment. You're avoiding memories? Pretty much. My couch is terrible. I know. You've complained about it. For years. And you still want to sleep on it. I've made worse decisions. That is unfortunately true. He smiled. I'll even buy breakfast tomorrow. You already bought breakfast. I'll buy second breakfast. You're not a hobbit. You can't prove that. By the time we reached my apartment building, the sky had begun turning from black to deep blue. Neither of us had noticed how late it had become. Inside, everything was quiet. The hallway lights buzzed softly overhead. I unlocked my apartment. Hudson followed me inside like he'd done dozens of times before. Because he had. He immediately kicked off his shoes. Home. You don't live here. Emotionally, maybe. You're impossible. I've heard. I grabbed an extra blanket from the closet. You remember where everything is. He looked offended. I practically helped decorate this place. You picked one lamp. It was a very good lamp. It was on sale. Exactly. I tossed him the blanket. He caught it. Thanks. I disappeared into the kitchen. You want tea? At 4 in the morning? You're sleeping here. So, you're not drinking coffee. Fair. A few minutes later, I returned carrying 2 mugs. Hudson had already stretched out across the couch. He looked up. You made tea. You sound surprised. I figured you'd tell me to deal with my own emotional damage. I considered it. But I like my mugs too much. He accepted the tea with a small smile. Thanks. We sat in silence for a while. The apartment felt different at that hour. Smaller. Softer. The city outside had almost completely gone quiet. Hudson stared into his mug. Can I ask you one last question? You've asked about 12. This one's different. I waited. When was the last time someone showed up for you? I frowned. What do you mean? The way you showed up tonight. I thought about it. Longer than I expected. I don't know. He looked genuinely surprised. Seriously? I shrugged. I usually handle things myself. You shouldn't. I know. No. He leaned forward. I mean, you really shouldn't. I looked at him. You spend so much time making sure everyone else is okay. His voice stayed calm. But I don't think you let anyone do that for you. I laughed quietly. You're doing psychology now? No. You're just easy to read. I don't think anyone has ever called me easy to read. I didn't say everyone could. That sentence lingered. Hudson rested his elbows on his knees. You know what I realized while I was waiting at that gas station? What? I've spent years surrounding myself with people. He looked toward the dark window. But somehow, you're the person I trust the most. I didn't answer. Mostly because I didn't know how. He laughed awkwardly. That sounded really serious. It was. I guess I never actually said it before. No. I should have. The room became quiet again. Outside, the first birds had started singing. Morning was arriving. Hudson noticed it too. We never slept. Apparently not. He smiled. This has been one of the strangest nights of my life. Mine too. He looked at me for a long second. I'm really glad I called you. The honesty in his voice made it impossible to answer with another joke. So am I. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Hudson stood. I should probably try to sleep. The couch awaits. He laughed. I hate that couch. I know. But tonight. He looked around my apartment before meeting my eyes again. Tonight it somehow feels like the safest place in the world. I wasn't sure whether he meant the couch, or the apartment, or me. And judging by the expression on his face, I wasn't sure he knew either. I woke up to the smell of coffee. For a second, I couldn't remember why someone else was in my apartment. Then I heard cabinet doors opening. Hudson. I checked the clock. 9:18 a.m. 4 hours of sleep. No wonder my head felt heavy. I walked into the kitchen to find Hudson standing barefoot in front of the coffee maker, wearing yesterday's hoodie and looking considerably more awake than he had any right to. He turned as soon as he heard me. Morning. You're making coffee. I found your emergency stash. You mean the coffee? You hide it behind the cereal. Because you drink too much of it. He looked offended. I drink exactly the correct amount. You once had 5 cups before noon. That was finals week. That was Saturday. He thought about it. Fair. I leaned against the doorway. You slept? Better than I expected. The couch didn't kill you? Almost. I told you. He laughed. You were right. I'll remember you admitted that. I regret everything. The familiar rhythm between us returned so naturally that it almost erased the strange honesty of the previous night. Almost. Hudson handed me a mug. Peace offering. For what? For emotionally ambushing you until 4 in the morning. I accepted it. I survived. You sure? No. He smiled. I figured. For a while we stood in the kitchen without speaking. Morning sunlight filled the apartment. Everything that had felt so significant in the middle of the night suddenly seemed strangely ordinary. Until Hudson broke the silence. My car's ready, so we'll go get it. You'll come. You don't know where it is anymore. I absolutely don't. I know. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't really want to drive there alone. You're 24. 23. Still. I know. He looked almost embarrassed. This breakup thing is making me weird. You're always weird. That's fair. Half an hour later, we were back on the road. This time the daylight revealed fields I'd barely noticed during the drive out. The gas station looked much smaller than it had in the dark. Hudson climbed out beside me. I'll only be a minute. I'll wait. He disappeared inside the repair office. I stayed leaning against my car, watching trucks roll past on the highway. About 10 minutes later, he walked back carrying his keys. Except he wasn't smiling. What? He shrugged. They fixed the car. That sounds positive. They also gave me the bill. That sounds expensive. Very. I laughed. You're laughing at my financial suffering. A little. You're a terrible friend. You called me at midnight. So, I've earned this. He shook his head. I hate that you're right. Instead of getting into his own car, he walked over to mine. You driving? You have a perfectly working vehicle now. I know. You should probably use it. He looked at it, then back at me. Can I follow you home instead? Afraid it'll explode again? No. He hesitated. He looked almost uncomfortable admitting it. I don't really feel like driving by myself yet. I nodded once. Okay. The drive back felt different. Every few minutes I caught his truck in my rearview mirror. Always the same distance behind me. Close enough to know he was there. Not close enough to feel crowded. At one red light, I glanced over. Hudson looked across and grinned before giving me a ridiculous salute. I laughed despite myself. Nothing about him made sense. An hour earlier, he'd looked completely lost. Now he was making military gestures through a truck window. When we reached town, he pulled alongside me at another stoplight. He rolled his window down. You hungry again? You're impossible. That wasn't a no. We literally had breakfast. People have lunch. It isn't even noon. We can prepare. The light turned green. I shook my head. You're paying. He pointed at me dramatically. Victory. As we drove away, I found myself smiling for no reason. Then I realized something. Hudson looked lighter. Not completely okay. Not even close. But lighter. And somehow, so did I. Neither of us noticed that this wasn't really about helping him through a breakup anymore. Something had quietly shifted between us during those hours after midnight. Neither of us knew exactly what it was. But for the first time in years, it felt like we were no longer simply moving through each other's lives out of habit. We were beginning to truly see each other. And neither of us understood yet how much that was about to change everything. Lunch turned into an entire afternoon. Neither of us planned it. Hudson suggested burgers. I argued for sandwiches. We compromised on a little cafe neither of us had visited before. This is how mature adults solve problems, he announced as we sat down. By avoiding both original options? Exactly. I hate that your logic somehow works. You love it. I tolerate it. Close enough. The waitress handed us menus. Hudson barely looked at his. You're getting the turkey club. I frowned. How do you know that? You always order sandwiches when you're pretending you aren't hungry. I'm hungry. Then you'll add fries. I looked down at the menu. He was right. Again. That's unsettling. He smiled. I've been paying attention. The words were simple, but they landed differently after everything we'd talked about the night before. I slowly closed the menu. What? You know me better than I thought. Hudson looked almost surprised. I was about to say the same thing. The waitress came back. Without thinking, Hudson ordered my drink before I opened my mouth. When she walked away, I looked at him. You remembered. You always get iced tea. You actually remembered. He shrugged. You remember all my stuff. That feels different. Why? I don't know. He leaned back in his chair. Can I admit something? You're making this a habit. I think I like honesty. Dangerous. Probably. He looked out the window for a second before speaking. I always figured you didn't need people. I blinked. What? You've got your life together. He counted on his fingers. You're organized. You plan everything. You're calm. You never seem overwhelmed. I laughed quietly. You've built an impressive fictional version of me. He smiled. Last night kind of ruined it. How? You answered your phone half asleep. He looked back at me, and I realized you spend all your energy taking care of everyone else. I didn't answer, because he wasn't entirely wrong. I don't think I've ever asked how you're doing. You've asked. No. He shook his head. I've said the words. He paused. I don't think I've actually listened. Something in his expression had changed. There was no guilt, just realization. The food arrived before either of us spoke again. For several minutes, we ate in comfortable silence. Hudson eventually put his sandwich down. So, what was his name? I looked up. The guy you dated. Oh, I hadn't expected that question. Ethan. What happened? I considered giving the short version. Instead, I heard myself answering honestly. He said he never knew what I was thinking. Hudson nodded slowly. I get that. He said I smiled whenever something bothered me. You do. He thought I trusted everyone equally. Hudson looked at me for a long moment. That one's definitely not true. No. He smiled faintly. You trust very few people. I looked at him. How do you know? Because I'm one of them. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. And the strange thing was, he was right. I'd trusted Hudson for years without ever noticing when it happened. Not all at once. Just little pieces at a time. A spare apartment key. Late-night phone calls. Inside jokes nobody else understood. The ability to sit together in complete silence without needing to explain it. Trust had quietly become the foundation of our friendship. Neither of us had ever said it aloud. Until now. Hudson leaned forward. Can I tell you something that sounds ridiculous? Go ahead. When my ex said I kept everyone at a distance. He smiled awkwardly. I immediately thought she was wrong. I raised an eyebrow. Because of you. I stayed quiet. I've never really kept you at a distance. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't think I even realized that until yesterday. I looked down at my plate. He was right again. Their relationship had lasted almost a year. Yet somehow I knew things about Hudson that she'd never known. His favorite movie when he was 12. Why he hated thunderstorms. The fact that he always called his mom every Sunday afternoon, even if the conversation lasted only 5 minutes. Which songs he skipped every single time they came on. Which smile meant he was genuinely happy, and which one meant he was trying to hide something. I knew all of it. Not because he'd made a grand effort to tell me. Because we'd simply kept showing up for each other. Again, and again, and again. Hudson looked at me carefully. What? You're thinking. That obvious? To me? He smiled. Yeah. I laughed softly. That might be slightly unfair. I've known you a long time. You have. He nodded. Long enough to know something changed last night. The words lingered between us. Neither of us rushed to define what he meant. Maybe because neither of us knew yet. We only knew that something had shifted. The easy familiarity was still there. The jokes. The teasing. The comfort. But beneath all of it, there was a new awareness. Not awkward. Not frightening. Just impossible to ignore. For the first time, it felt as though we were looking at each other without the assumptions we'd carried for years. And that made even the simplest conversation feel unexpectedly important. When we left the cafe, neither of us headed for our cars. Hudson stretched, glanced up at the clear afternoon sky, and said, "Walk with me." Where? I don't know. That narrows it down. He laughed. You're saying yes, though. I haven't said anything. You're walking beside me. That happened accidentally. Sure it did. The downtown streets were busier now. People carried shopping bags, sat outside coffee shops, waited for buses. For once, Hudson wasn't the loudest person on the sidewalk. He seemed thoughtful. We walked for nearly 10 minutes before either of us spoke. Finally, he stopped in front of a bookstore. You remember this place? I looked up at the old brick building. I haven't been here in years. You brought me here. I did. My first semester. He smiled to himself. I failed my first literature quiz. You skipped half the reading. I skimmed. You read the chapter titles. I was experimenting. With academic failure. Exactly. I laughed. I remember. You dragged me in here and helped me find the books. I remember that part. He looked through the window. I don't think I ever thanked you. You've been saying thank you a lot today. I've been realizing a lot today. That answer lingered between us. We wandered inside. The familiar scent of old paper immediately surrounded us. Hudson drifted toward the fiction shelves. I disappeared into history, as usual. About 5 minutes later, he found me. Without saying anything, he held out a book. You'd like this. I looked at the title. He was right. Again. You actually read the description? I know what you read. I accepted it. You're making this difficult. What? I thought I was the observant one. He smiled. You are. No. I looked around the quiet aisle. I've spent years thinking I was paying more attention. Hudson leaned against the shelf. You did. I don't think so. You noticed different things. Like what? You noticed when I forgot assignments. He counted quietly. When I wasn't sleeping enough. When I was pretending everything was okay. I nodded. You noticed those too. Eventually. He smiled. But you noticed things I didn't even know I was doing. I folded my arms. And you? He looked almost embarrassed. I noticed you never buy books unless you're absolutely certain you'll love them. I blinked. You always read the last page first. I stared at him. You organize your bookshelf alphabetically for about 3 weeks. I laughed. Then it becomes complete chaos. He grinned. You always carry aspirin in your backpack. That one's practical. You always sit facing the door in restaurants. My smile slowly disappeared. I'd never mentioned that to anyone. How long have you known that? Since sophomore year. And you never said anything? I figured there was probably a reason. There was. A stupid one. An old habit I'd never broken. But hearing him mention it made something click inside me. He had been paying attention. Quietly. Consistently. For years. Just like I had. We left the bookstore carrying one bag between us. Hudson glanced at it. I bought your book. You absolutely did not. I absolutely did. You're impossible. You drove 30 miles after midnight. So now we're even. We are definitely not even. He laughed. I'll keep trying. As we walked back toward the parking lot, his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His smile faded. My ex. You don't have to answer. I know. He stood there for a moment, staring at the phone. Then he silenced it and slipped it back into his pocket. You're not calling her back? Not right now. You sure? He nodded slowly. If I talk to her right now. He looked at me. I'll probably apologize for things that weren't actually my fault. I understood that feeling. Too well. Instead of saying anything, I simply nodded. We kept walking. After another minute, Hudson spoke again. You know what scared me most last night? The car bill. He laughed softly. No. What then? He took a slow breath. When I was sitting at that gas station, his eyes stayed on the sidewalk. I realized I couldn't think of anyone else I wanted there. I didn't interrupt. I've got friends. You know that. I know. But they would have tried to cheer me up. He smiled faintly. You just showed up. The simplicity of those words hit harder than any dramatic speech could have. I didn't need someone to fix anything. He looked over at me. I just needed someone I trusted. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The parking lot came into view ahead. Cars shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Hudson stopped beside mine instead of walking to his truck. Can I ask you one more thing? You're really testing the definition of one more. He smiled. Last one. Go ahead. If I hadn't called last night. He hesitated. Do you think we'd still be pretending everything between us was just normal? The question caught me completely off guard. I searched for an answer. Then I realized I already had one. Yes. Hudson looked almost relieved. I think so too. He leaned against my car, thoughtful. Funny. What is? One broken down truck. He smiled. And somehow it feels like I finally found my way to the person who'd been beside me all along. Neither of us joked after that. Because neither of us could pretend that sentence hadn't changed something. We stood there for another few seconds before Hudson finally exhaled. Well, I echoed. That got unexpectedly deep. It usually does when you stop making jokes. He pointed at me. I made at least 3 jokes. You also confessed your entire emotional history. One doesn't cancel out the other. It definitely doesn't. He smiled. I was afraid you'd say that. I unlocked my car. So what's the plan now? You're asking me? You're the spontaneous one. Hudson pretended to think. I have absolutely no idea. That sounds about right. He laughed, then looked down at the bookstore bag still sitting on my passenger seat. You're really going to read that tonight, aren't you? Yes. You always start books the same day you buy them. You notice that too? I notice more than you think. Those words stayed with me all the way home. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to read. Trying being the important word. Every few pages my attention drifted. Not because of the book. Because my mind kept replaying the last 24 hours. The phone call. The drive. The diner. The conversations we'd somehow never had in 4 years of friendship. Around 6, my phone buzzed. Hudson. Made it home. A second message arrived almost immediately. Apartment feels weird. I smiled before answering. Because it's quiet? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Returned. No. Another pause. Because you're not here. I stared at the screen. It was such a simple sentence. Something either of us could have said 100 different times over the years. But after everything that had happened, it carried a different weight. I typed, "You'll survive." His reply came instantly. "Probably." Then another. "Still miss having someone around." I leaned back on my couch. "Call your brother. He's on deployment." "Your mom." "Working." I sighed. "So what exactly are you asking?" This time it took longer. Almost a full minute. Finally, "Would it be weird if we had dinner?" I checked the clock. It was barely after 6. We'd spent almost the entire day together. Normal people usually wanted a break after that, didn't they? I found myself smiling anyway. Didn't we already spend like 15 hours together? His answer appeared almost immediately. "Yeah." Another message. I kind of forgot that. Then, maybe that's my answer. I frowned. Answer to what? Nothing. 30 seconds. A minute. Then my phone rang. "Hudson." I answered. "You couldn't text this?" "No. You're becoming very attached to phone calls." I noticed. His voice sounded lighter than it had the previous night. Still thoughtful, but lighter. So I said, "So, you're avoiding my question." "I know." "What answer?" He was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he finally spoke. "You asked why I wanted dinner." "Yeah, I think." He hesitated. "I got used to today." I didn't interrupt. "I got used to talking to you." Another pause. "I got used to not feeling alone." I closed my eyes. "Hudson." "I know." "No, listen." His voice stayed calm. "I'm not saying anything dramatic. I just—" He searched for the words. Went back to my apartment and realized the best part of my day wasn't forgetting about the breakup. What was it? You. The apartment around me suddenly felt very quiet. Not awkward. Just still. Hudson let out a nervous laugh. "You're not saying anything." "I'm thinking." "That usually means I've accidentally said something terrifying." "No." "Good." I looked out my living room window. The evening sun was beginning to disappear behind the buildings. "I missed you too." The words came out before I had time to overthink them. Silence. Then Hudson laughed softly. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I think that's the first time either of us has ever admitted that." He was right. It shouldn't have felt like such a big thing. Friends missed each other all the time. But somehow this felt different. Maybe because we'd finally stopped hiding behind routine. Stopped assuming the other person already knew. Hudson cleared his throat. So, dinner." I smiled. "Come over." "Really? You're buying?" "I absolutely am." And this time, I picked up the bookstore bag from the passenger seat. "You don't get to steal my fries." He laughed. "No promises." For the first time in a long while, I found myself looking forward to the evening with an excitement I couldn't quite explain. And somewhere across town, I had the feeling Hudson was smiling for exactly the same reason. Hudson showed up 25 minutes later carrying 2 paper bags and looking noticeably more awake than he had that morning. He knocked once before opening the door. "I brought food." "You also have a key." "I know. So why knock?" He shrugged. Felt right. That tiny answer caught my attention more than it probably should have. Yesterday, he had walked into my apartment like it was an extension of his own. Tonight, he waited. It wasn't distance. It was consideration. "Come in," I said. He held up the bags. "Burgers." "You ignored my suggestion again." "I remembered you secretly liked burgers more." "I do not." "You absolutely do. You're making dangerous assumptions." "I've got 4 years of evidence." I couldn't argue with that. We spread everything across my kitchen counter. Hudson unpacked fries, burgers, drinks, and somehow an entire slice of cheesecake. "When did that happen?" I panicked. "So you bought dessert?" "I make excellent decisions under pressure." That sentence has never been true. He laughed. It wasn't true this time either. We carried everything into the living room. Instead of turning on the television like we usually did, we simply sat across from each other. Neither of us seemed interested in background noise. Hudson noticed first. "We're not watching anything." "No." "That's unusual." "A little." He took a bite of his burger. "You know what I've been thinking about?" "The bookstore." "No." "The diner." "No." "My terrible couch?" "That deserves its own documentary." I smiled. "So what?" "The phone call." I looked up. "Last night." "Yeah." He rested his elbows on his knees. "I almost hung up before you answered." "Why?" "I figured you'd be annoyed." "I was." "I know. But you still came." He smiled to himself. "I keep replaying that." I swallowed a sip of iced tea. "I don't think it was really about needing a ride." "No." He looked at me. "I think I needed proof." "Proof of what?" His answer came quietly. "That someone would choose me." The room fell silent. He didn't sound dramatic. He sounded honest. I know that sounds pathetic. It doesn't. I've spent so much time trying to be the easy guy. He gave a small shrug. The fun one. The one nobody worries about. I didn't realize how exhausting that was until my car broke down. I looked at him carefully. You're allowed to need people. He laughed softly. I know. I just forgot. I stared down at my untouched fries. So did I. His eyes lifted immediately. What? I don't exactly make it easy either. You're different. How? You disappear. I frowned. When something's bothering you. He gestured toward me with one fry. You don't call. You don't complain. You just become quieter. I opened my mouth. Closed it again. He was right. I always assumed you wanted space. I usually do. He nodded. But sometimes, I searched for words I hadn't expected to say. Sometimes I just want someone to notice. Hudson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me with an expression I'd never quite seen before. Not curiosity. Not concern. Recognition. I noticed. You did. A lot. He smiled sadly. I just thought you'd tell me if you wanted company. I thought you'd know. We both laughed at exactly the same moment. That is incredibly stupid, Hudson said. It really is. You expected me to read your mind. You expected me to ask for help. He pointed at me. We're both terrible at this. I nodded. We really are. The laughter faded, but the ease remained. For the first time in years, it felt like we weren't trying to protect each other from uncomfortable conversations. We were simply having them. Hudson leaned back against the couch. I've got another confession. You're on a roll. I don't think my ex was completely wrong. I waited. She said I spent more time talking to you than I did to her. He rubbed the back of his neck. I thought she was exaggerating. And now, I started thinking about it today. He smiled awkwardly. She wasn't exaggerating. I looked at him. You've been my first phone call for almost everything. He counted quietly. When I got the internship. When my grandfather went into the hospital. When my truck got stolen for 6 hours. I blinked. It wasn't actually stolen. They towed it. You still called me. I did. He laughed. I called you before I called my insurance. You absolutely did. I guess I always knew you'd answer. There it was again. That same sentence from the night before. Only this time, it felt even more significant. Not because it hinted at something romantic. Because it revealed something we'd somehow never acknowledged. For years, without discussing it, we'd quietly become each other's safest place. Neither of us had planned it. Neither of us had even noticed it happening. It had simply become true. Hudson looked toward the darkening window. You know what scares me now? What? He met my eyes. I don't want yesterday to be the only time we're this honest. Neither did I. But admitting that out loud somehow felt like crossing a line neither of us fully understood yet. So instead, I smiled. You're buying dinner again next week. He laughed. That wasn't exactly what I meant. I know, but it's a start. He looked at me for a long second before smiling back. Yeah, it is. The next week passed differently than any week before it. Not because something dramatic happened, because something quietly changed. Hudson started calling instead of texting. Not every day, just often enough that I stopped being surprised when my phone lit up with his name. Sometimes it was about nothing. You think blue shirts are overrated? Yes. I knew you'd say that. Other times, he just wanted company during the drive home. Or while standing in line at the grocery store. Or because he'd found a terrible movie trailer he insisted I needed to hear about immediately. Without realizing it, those conversations became part of my day. And somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending they were interruptions. They became something I looked forward to. A week after the midnight phone call, we met for dinner again. This time at the same diner. The waitress smiled as soon as we walked in. Back already? Hudson pointed at me. He likes the coffee. I do not. You absolutely do. She laughed. You boys always argue like you've known each other forever. Hudson looked at me. It kind of feels like forever. I smiled. Almost. After dinner, we walked outside into the cool evening. The parking lot was quiet. Cars rolled slowly through the nearby intersection. Hudson leaned against his truck. You know? What? I've been thinking about that night. The car. The phone call. He looked toward the sky for a moment. I don't think it changed our friendship. No. No. He smiled softly. I think it showed me what it already was. I felt something settle quietly inside me. Not excitement. Not confusion. Recognition. He continued. I spent years looking for people who made me feel understood. He laughed under his breath. The funny part, I'd already found one. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I asked, "So what now?" He looked at me with the same easy smile I'd known for years. "Now," he shrugged, "I keep showing up." The simplicity of the answer made me smile. "That sounds manageable." "You?" "I keep answering the phone." He laughed. "Deal." Without thinking, we hugged. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of moment movies build toward. It simply felt natural, like acknowledging something we'd both known for much longer than we'd admitted. When we stepped back, Hudson smiled. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "My truck breaking down might have been the best thing that happened to me all year. That repair bill says otherwise." He laughed. "Still worth it." I shook my head. "You're unbelievable. I've got proof now." "Proof of what?" He looked at me for one quiet moment. "That if everything falls apart after midnight." He smiled. "I know exactly who I'll call." This time I didn't joke. "You'll never have to wonder if I'll answer." His expression softened. "I know. That was the difference." A week earlier, he'd hoped. Now he knew. As I watched him climb into his truck, I realized the biggest change hadn't been the late-night rescue, the long conversations, or even the honesty we'd finally found. It was trust, the kind built slowly over years. The kind you don't notice until one ordinary night changes the way you see everything that came before it. Hudson started his engine. Before driving away, he rolled down his window. "Hey, Grayson." "Yeah. Thanks for picking me up." I smiled. "You're welcome." He nodded once. Then he drove away. I watched his taillights disappear into the evening, already knowing that if my phone rang after midnight again, I'd answer without hesitation. Because some people don't become important all at once. They become home one ordinary day at a time. And sometimes, it takes a broken-down truck in the middle of the night to finally realize you've already found where you belong.